Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 631, and today is July 9th, 2024. I'm the host of this show, Kyle Anzalone. We got a lot of news to get through on today's show, but first I need to talk about our fundraiser at the Libertarian Institute. This is our summer fundraiser. We only hold 2 a year, and we ask for, just our viewers to come in and to make small donations, 20, 30, 40, 50 bucks if you can, and help us out, help us to meet our fundraising goal. This is what allows us to continue to do what we do at the Institute, which is to speak and write the truth about other issues that the mainstream media and just the general establishment class will lie to you about and will tell falsehoods. And they do it because, they have corporate sponsors, donors, advertisers, things like that pay them money to lie about wars and other things so they get more funding. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, all these companies spend money advertising at CBS and all the other mainstream news organizations. That way those organizations tell stories to the American people about how dangerous the world is, how threatening the world is, and how America needs to be involved everywhere, selling weapons to everyone, or else you yourself will personally be in danger. And so to combat that narrative, there must be independent voices out there. And I think the Libertarian Institute is one of the growing voices in the whole independent media sphere and also the libertarian movement in general. So help us out, help us to meet our fundraising goals. Libertarianinstitute.org. Just go to the homepage. We have all over how you can find the donation, or if you want to go directly to it, libertarianinstitute.org/donate. Great kitbats if you donate, by the way. We'll give you some of the books. We've published 14 books at the Institute. You could pick one of them to have if you donate, I think over 50 bucks, free ebooks, free swag, stuff like that. So again, head on over to the Libertarian Institute, make a donation, get yourself a book. Now I will start talking about the news today. And the first one up here, really concerning. Zelensky says new security pact includes mechanism for Poland to shoot down Russian missiles over Ukraine. So this is from Dave DeCamp, July 8th, antiwar.com. On Monday, President Zelensky said that a new bilateral security pact that was signed in Warsaw includes a mechanism for Poland to shoot down Russian missiles and drones. Zelensky said at the joint press conference with the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk after signing the deal, "We are especially grateful for the special arrangements, and this is reflected in the security agreement. It provides for the development of a mechanism to shoot down by Poland Russian missiles and drones fired in the airspace of Ukraine in the direction of Poland. I am confident that our teams and the teams of the Ministries of Defense, together with our military, will work together to work out how we can quickly implement this point of agreement." So Zelensky and other Ukrainian officials have been pushing for NATO countries to intercept Russian missiles over Ukraine or to create no-fly zones in western Ukraine, which would amount to direct NATO involvement in the war. This step would risk a NATO-Russia war, which could quickly turn nuclear, but European NATO countries aren't ruling out the idea. Russian missiles have briefly entered Poland's airspace, and Russian drone fragments have been found in Romania, but the only time an incident led to casualties was when a Ukrainian air defense missile landed in Poland, killing 2 people. Ukrainian officials initially claimed it was a Russian missile and attempted to provoke a NATO intervention. The Ukrainian-Polish agreement also commits Warsaw to training more Ukrainian troops in its territory. Zelensky said the Ukrainian Legion will train in Poland and be equipped with the help of our partners. Every Ukrainian citizen who decides to join the Legion will be able to sign a contract with the armed forces of Ukraine. Our teams are currently working out all the details of this proposal, he explained. And so this is a major escalation. Now, Connor Freeman, co-host, will be back on the show later in the week to talk about a massive military aid package that the U.S. just signed off to Poland. And one has to wonder if there's any connection between that aid package and this agreement. Maybe it was a bribe from Washington to get Poland to sign on to this. Maybe the White House viewed it would be too provocative for the U.S. to take this step first, and so they pushed Poland to do it instead. So a lot of concerns here. This could be a very significant and a very major escalation. All right, now let's talk about what's going on inside of Ukraine. This again, Dave DeCamp, July 8th, antiwar.com. Russian missiles pound targets across 5 regions in Ukraine. So Dave writes, on Monday, Russia launched a massive missile attack across Ukraine, targeting 5 regions, including the capital Kiev, which faces heaviest bombardment in about 4 months. According to Ukrainian authorities, 31 people were killed in the strikes. Ukrainian officials said a Russian missile struck a children's hospital in Kiev, while Moscow denied the claim and said evidence pointed to a Ukrainian air defense missile hitting the hospital. Ukrainian officials said at least 10 people were killed during the bombardment of Kiev, including 2 staff members at the hospital. They said 7 of the city's 10 districts were targeted by Russia. The Russian Defense Ministry claimed its forces destroyed 3 U.S.-made HIMARS rocket systems and also killed 10 foreign specialists who were operating them. Besides the strikes across Ukraine, battles also raged across the front lines. So the military said operational tactical aircraft, unmanned aerial vehicles, missile troops, and artillery of the Russian groups of forces destroyed 3 U.S.-made HIMARS multiple rocket launchers and up to 10 foreign specialists for their use, and struck massed enemy manpower and military hardware in 122 locations. The Russia escalation comes as NATO is preparing to hold its summit in Washington on Tuesday to Thursday. The alliance isn't expecting to give Kiev a clear path to membership, but will announce a plan to provide around $43 billion in military aid for 2025, as it is determined to continue the proxy war despite the massive destruction of Ukraine. And that package, I believe, is going to be what is ultimately coming out of NATO plans to what they called Trump-proof the aid in Ukraine. What they are arguing is that if Donald Trump comes into office, he may revoke the U.S. military aid or at least curtail it to Ukraine. And so they've been trying to set up a 10-year package that would prevent Trump, and whoever the next president is, because Trump only has 4 more years, from being able to curtail the American military aid to Ukraine. And because, let's face it, Germany, the UK, they could donate to Ukraine, and it certainly, I'm sure, is helpful and a meaningful contribution. But at the same time, if the Americans aren't contributing, then there's no way Europe itself could do the heavy lifting. The air defense systems that Ukraine needs, they're getting them straight from the American production lines. And so if we're not sending air defense interceptors to Ukraine, then the Europeans simply don't have them to send. And that means there's going to be real struggles here in arming Ukraine. So the Americans are absolutely necessary. It looks like the plan is going to be to Trump-proof the aid for around 1 year. All that's going to do is lead to more killing of Ukrainians. All right, next up here, a couple articles that I wrote for the Libertarian Institute. First up, NATO needs 35 to 50 additional brigades. So the North Atlantic Alliance new battle plans require members to produce hundreds of thousands of new soldiers and military equipment for a potential war with Russia. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg claims the alliance already has 500,000 soldiers at high readiness for combat. A military source speaking with Reuters discussed the demands of the military alliance's secret military plans. He said the strategy requires NATO members to create 35 to 50 brigades consisting of 3,000 to 7,000 troops. And so, I did the math, just 35 times 3,000 and 50 times 7,000 to get the range of troops, which is between 100,000 and 350,000 new soldiers. Obviously, that number is going to be somewhere in the middle and is not sitting on either of the extremes. So if you would assume like 5,000 troops per each brigade and then 40 to 45 brigades, we're talking between 200 and 250,000 new troops. The U.S. has the NATO's largest army, which is important to note, but Turkey has the second largest army, and Turkey right now is actually talking about holding talks with Vladimir Putin. So it seems kind of unlikely that Turkey is going to contribute. The U.S. is already struggling to meet its recruitment goals. And so there's real questions about how these goals could possibly be achieved. Now, the plans were agreed to at last year's NATO summit in Lithuania, and they're expected to be updated at this week's alliances gathering in the U.S. No idea if they're going to make it more reasonable or not, given the comments by Stoltenberg and this unnamed NATO official that was speaking with Reuters. Doesn't seem like that is going to be the case. Stoltenberg claimed that the alliance already has 500,000 soldiers at high readiness in Eastern Europe in a recent speech. He said, "Today we have 500,000 troops on high readiness, combat-ready battle groups in the eastern part of the alliance for the first time." He made those remarks on Friday. And I should mention here that I was on Judge Napolitano's show, Judging Freedom, yesterday, and we talked about this particular story. Additionally, huge thank you to the judge who gave a real plug to this podcast when I was on his show yesterday. So not only check out that episode, but I already saw in the comment section of my previous videos that members of the judge's audience have already worked their way over and subscribed to my show. So huge appreciation to all of you who have done that. It's really cool to see the audience growing and to get endorsements from people who I've really regarded as the greats of the libertarian movement, like Judge Napolitano, for years and years and years of this show. All right, so back to my article here. NATO will additionally face a challenge in finding munitions to equip the soldiers. The official explained that many of the new brigades will be additional air defenses. It was noted that Germany has just 9 Patriot air defense systems, down from a high of 36 during the Cold War. In 2022, Berlin had 12 systems, but transferred a quarter of those to Kiev. So the official said air and missile defense, long-range weapons, logistics, as well as land maneuverable formations are among our top priorities. NATO is likely to set more demanding capability targets for allies as we develop forces that can implement our plans and meet the threats we face. We are confident that our deterrence is and will remain strong. So it's unclear when Patriot makers Lockheed Martin and Raytheon or RTX will be able to equip the new brigades. The systems are in ample demand for potential conflicts with Russia and China. The White House recently determined all new produced Patriot interceptors will go to Ukraine. And so if all the new systems now are going to Ukraine, but we also have a backlog in sending these to Taiwan and other places in the Asia Pacific, it really is unclear when we're going to be able to send 3, 6, 9, 12 of these systems to Germany, so then they could start training German forces and develop these brigades. It just seems like this is an incredibly long way off and a very far-fetched plan. All right, next up here, doesn't look like we're going to be seeing any de-escalation anytime soon. This from a Russian official. Russia rules out all nuclear talks with the U.S. until Washington adopts a sane approach. So a top Russian diplomat stressed that the Kremlin is unwilling to engage with the White House on arms control issues due to the Biden administration's Russia-phobic stance. Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov argued that President Donald Trump left the Intermediate Range Forces Treaty, the INF Treaty, to provoke China. So in an interview with International Affairs published on Monday, Ryabkov explained that Moscow's position on arms control talks with Washington. He said, "We do not have the foundation right now, and we are not even close to shaping one in order to launch tentative dialogue, not even talks in this field. This is a result of Washington's destructive policy course. Until the U.S. clearly shows some change for the better in their policy, at the very least demonstrate that this boundless and unabashed Russophobia has been set aside and is replaced with slightly more sane approach. Until this happens, there can simply be no dialogue on strategic stability," Ryabkov explained. Since the end of the Cold War, Washington has abandoned a series of agreements that limited the U.S. and Russia's conventional as well as nuclear arsenals. Additionally, the Kremlin left the New START treaty in response to the White House's support for Kiev. The deterioration of the global arms control agreement has coincided with the rise in spending on nuclear weapons and arms overall. Both Beijing and Moscow view the launchers as highly provocative. Rabkov argued that Trump left the INF treaty to build intermediate range missiles to intimidate China. So Rabkov said, Americans need to withdraw from the treaty in order to create such systems to intimidate the People's Republic of China, and it is no coincidence that we have already recently have a sharply intensified discussion about when and where the Americans will begin to redeploy their medium-range weapons in the Asia-Pacific region. Recently, Washington and Moscow have taken steps to use arms limited by the INF Treaty. The agreement barred land-based missiles and launchers with a range of 300 to 3,400 miles. The U.S. has deployed a covert launcher for intermediate-range missiles to Denmark and the Philippines for war games. On Friday, Russian President Vladimir Putin said that Moscow would begin producing weapons that the INF Treaty outlawed. He said, "We need to start production of these strike systems and then, based on the actual situation, make decisions about where, if necessary, to ensure our safety to place them." And so Putin, I guess, is saying that we're going to have these weapons. If the U.S. deploys them to Europe, then we will deploy these systems to areas of Russia to counter the deployment of these systems. All right, next up here, moving to the Asia Pacific, Japan, Philippines signed new military pact aimed at China. So this one from Dave DeCamp, antiwar.com. On Monday, Japan and the Philippines signed a new defense pact that will allow the two nations to deploy troops to each other's territory, a step being taken as a part of the U.S.-led military buildup against China in the region. According to the Associated Press, the deal was signed by the Philippines Defense Secretary and the Japanese Foreign Minister in Manila during a ceremony that was witnessed by President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., the leader of the Philippines. The agreement will come into effect once ratified by both nations' respective legislators. The deal will foster more military exercises between the two countries, including trilateral deals with the U.S. The deal comes just a few months after President Biden hosted the first ever trilateral summit between the leaders of the U.S. and Japan and the Philippines. The U.S. has largely been encouraging its allies in Asia Pacific to bolster military ties as a part of its strategy against China. Last year, Japan signed a similar deal with Australia, which marked the first agreement of its kind that Tokyo struck with another nation besides the U.S. in the post-World War II area. In a joint statement on Monday, the Japanese and Philippines ministers signaled out China, expressing concern over the dangerous and escalatory actions by Beijing at the Second Thomas Shoal, referring to the Philippines-occupied reef in the South China Sea that is also claimed by China, Vietnam, and Taiwan. Since Marcos came into office in 2022, China and the Philippines vessels have frequently had encounters near the disputed reef. Marcos has been emboldened by the U.S., which vows the U.S.-Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty applies to Philippines boats in the South China Sea. Over in Beijing, the Chinese Foreign Ministry condemned the Japan-Philippines military pact. The spokesperson said the Asia-Pacific region does not need military blocs, let alone small groupings that instigate bloc confrontations or a nude Cold War. All right, next up here, I have an article from 972 magazine, and I'm going to just kind of look away off screen here to read over some of my notes on it. So the article is titled, "I'm Bored So I Shoot, the Israeli Army's Approval of Free-for-All Violence in Gaza." It was posted by Oren Ziv on July 8th, 2024. And again, 972 magazine is a Tel Aviv based outlet. So these are Israeli reporters and they are speaking with Israeli soldiers. So the article says, in early June, Al Jazeera aired a series of disturbing videos revealing what it described as summary executions. Israeli soldiers shooting dead several Palestinians walking near the coastal road in the Gaza Strip on 3 separate occasions. In each case, the Palestinians appeared unarmed and did not pose any imminent threat to the soldiers. Such footage is rare due to the severe constraints faced by journalists in the besieged enclave and the constant danger to their lives. But these executions, which did not appear to have any security rationale, are consistent with the testimonies of 6 Israeli soldiers who spoke with 972 magazine and Local Call following their release from active duty in Gaza in recent months, corroborating the testimony of the Palestinian eyewitnesses and doctors throughout the war. The soldiers described as being authorized to open fire on Palestinians virtually at will, including civilians. The 6 sources, all except one who spoke on condition of anonymity, recounted how Israeli soldiers routinely executed Palestinian civilians simply because they entered areas the military defined as no-go zones. The testimonies paint a picture of landscape littered with civilian corpses, which are left to rot or be eaten by stray animals. The army only hides them from view ahead of the arrival of international aid convoys so that images of people in bad stages of decay don't come out. 2 of the soldiers also testified to systematic policy of setting Palestinian homes on fire after occupying them. Several sources described how the ability to shoot without restrictions gave soldiers a way to blow off steam or relieve the dullness of their daily routine. People want to experience the event fully, as a reservist who served in the northern Gaza recalled. I personally fired a few bullets for no reason into the sea or at the sidewalk of an abandoned building. They report it as normal fire, which is codenamed for I'm bored, so I shoot. Since the 1980s, the Israeli military has refused to disclose its open fire regulations, despite various petitions to the High Court of Justice. According to political sociologist Yagil Levy, since the Second Intifada, the army has not given soldiers written rules of engagement, leaving much of it open to the interpretation of soldiers in the field and their commanders, as well as contributing to the killing of over 38,000 Palestinians. Sources testify that the last directives were also partly responsible for the high number of soldiers killed by friendly fire in recent months. Another soldier, B, said there was total freedom of action. Another soldier who served in the regular forces in Gaza for several months, including his battalion command center, he said, if there is even a feeling of a threat, there is no need to explain. You just shoot. When soldiers see somebody is approaching, it is permissible to shoot at their center of mass, their body, and not into the air. It is permissible to shoot everyone, even a young girl, even an old woman. B went on to describe an incident in November when soldiers killed several civilians during an evacuation of a school close to a neighborhood in Gaza City, which has started a shelter for displaced Palestinians. The army ordered the evacuees to exit to the left towards the sea rather than right, where the soldiers were stationed. When gunfighting erupted inside the school, those who veered the wrong way into the ensuing chaos were immediately fired at. So B says that it was difficult to distinguish civilians from combatants in Gaza, claiming that members of Hamas often walk around without their weapons, but as a result, every man between the ages of 60 and 50 is suspected of being a terrorist. He said it is forbidden to walk around, and everyone who is outside is suspicious. If we see someone in a window looking at us, he is a suspect. You shoot. The army's perception is that any contact with the population endangers the forces, and a situation must be created in which it is forbidden to approach the soldiers under any circumstances. The Palestinians learned that when we enter, they run away. Even in seemingly unpopulated or abandoned areas of Gaza, soldiers engaged in extensive shooting in a procedure known as demolition, demonstrating presence. S testified that his fellow soldiers would shoot a lot even if for no reason. Anyone who wants to shoot, no matter what the reason, shoots. In some cases, he noted this was intended to remove people from their hiding places or to demonstrate presence. M, another reservist who served in the Gaza Strip, explained that such orders would come directly from commanders of the company or battalion in the field. He said, when there is no other IDF forces in the area, the shooting is very unrestricted and like crazy. And it's not just small arms, machine guns, tanks, and mortars. Even in the absence of soldiers even in the absence of orders from above. M testified that soldiers in the field regularly take the law into their own hands. Regular soldiers, junior officers, battalion commanders, and the junior ranks who want to shoot, they get permission. S remembered hearing over the radio about a soldier stationed in a protected compound who shot a Palestinian family walking around nearby. First they say 4 people. It turns into 2 children plus 2 adults. By the end, it's a man, a woman, and 2 children. You can assemble the picture yourself. Only one of the soldiers interviewed for this investigation was willing to be identified by name, Yuval Green, a 26-year-old reservist from Jerusalem who served in the 55th Paratroopers Brigade in November and December last year. Green recently signed a letter by 41 reservists declaring their refusal to continue serving in Gaza following the army's invasion of Rafah. There were no restrictions on the ammunition, Green said, people shooting just to relieve their boredom. Green described an incident occurred one night around the Jewish festival of Hanukkah in December when the whole battalion opened fire together, like fireworks, including tracer rounds, which ignite with a bright light that made a crazy color illuminating the sky. Because Hanukkah is the festival of lights, it became symbolic. See, another soldier who served in Gaza explained that when soldiers heard gunshots, they radioed in to clarify that there were another military unit in the area, and if not, they opened fire. People shot as they pleased, with all their might. But see, noted unrestricted shooting meant that soldiers often exposed to huge risk of friendly fire, which he described as more dangerous than Hamas. On multiple occasions, the IDF fired in our direction. We didn't respond. We checked the radio and no one was hurt. At the time of the writing, at least 324 Israeli soldiers have been killed in Gaza since the ground invasion began, at least 28 of them by friendly fire, according to the army. Green's experience with such incidents were the main issue, endangering soldiers' lives, but there was quite a bit of friendly fire. It drove me crazy. And this article goes on and on and on, but basically it confirms a lot of, what I've already went into and a lot of what we heard in recent months, which is that the Israeli soldiers not only have been given a blank check, but they've set up these invisible lines around Gaza that they call free fire zones. And any Palestinian that enters one of these zones could be gunned down, killed, and their body will be left for days, weeks, eaten by dogs, partly disposed, and then when an international aid convoy will come in, they'll take the bulldozer and they'll push all these bodies into a small pile of rubble so nobody can see. I think this, has a couple really important issues. The first is just the massive number of war crimes being committed in Gaza, but the second is the likely death toll of the fighting. And I think this really suggests that the death toll, the actual death toll, is likely much higher than 38,000, probably closer to 50,000 or higher than that. Now, there's this other article on the death toll in Gaza that's making its rounds on the internet, and I want to get into it and talk about it just a little bit, because I think in part it's being misstated, and additionally it's maybe not accurate and maybe even undercount. So the Lancet says Gaza death toll could exceed 186,000. So the British medical journal The Lancet published an article on July 5th that estimates the actual death toll of the US-backed military campaign in Gaza could be over 186,000 if there was a ceasefire today. The article was written by a group of experts that take into account indirect deaths that have already taken place and will continue to happen to form its estimate. And so what they are saying in that 186,000 number is not just people who are already dead. I want to make that clear. This includes people that will die because of the war. So a child who has one or both legs amputated and then either starves to death or gets an infection and dies from that, that counts. Somebody who maybe is a diabetic, they can't get insulin. Somebody who doesn't have their heart medication and they go into heart failure, something like that. These are the kind of deaths counted here. Starvation, deprivation, I'm guessing suicides of people who are extremely traumatized by this fighting. These deaths are all going to be counted in the coming months. Now, I want to get into how they came up with this number a little bit, because this is where I have a little bit of issues with this article. So in the article, they note that the Gaza Health Ministry estimate is an undercount, but they say that, and at the time of the writing, the count was 37,400 when they wrote this article. And so they took that number and they say typically in conflicts, the number of indirect deaths range from 3 to 15 times higher than the number of actual deaths. And so they pit the factor of 4, and they don't get into a lot of details as why they did. And look, the factor of 4 may be low. Right. A lot of people who are criticizing this article are saying that, oh, this is massively overcounting the death toll. But if you have looked and listened to what doctors in Gaza are saying, they're talking about, there's 86,000 severely or moderately injured Palestinians. And they are saying that none of them are able to get the medical care they need. And a lot of them are going to end up dying. And so when you take that number, that 80,000 number, and look at that with already the 37,000 deaths, and consider the number of people that are at or near starvation, the number of bodies that are just buried in these shallow graves that Israel has made with bulldozers, I think it's very possible that the number that the Lancet is using here just isn't accurate enough to multiply out, and it may actually be somewhat higher. It is worth noting that they say that this is going to kill off between 7 and 9% of the Gaza population. I mean, you understand why people are using genocide when you listen and look at those numbers. All right, next up here, Israeli opposition leader offers to support Netanyahu if he accepts a hostage deal. So the Israeli opposition leader and former Prime Minister Yair Lapid on Monday said he would support Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu if he reaches a hostage deal and a ceasefire deal with Hamas. Netanyahu's coalition holds 64 out of the 120 seats of the Knesset, meaning only 5 members need to quit for it to lose a majority, which would dissolve the government and force elections. The Israeli Minister of National Security, Itamar Ben-Gvir, has threatened that his Jewish Power Party, which holds 6 seats, would quit the government if Netanyahu agrees to a deal with Hamas. Polling shows that Netanyahu would lose if there were new elections, giving him the motive to continue the genocidal war to maintain his control on power. Yair Lapid, who leads the Yesh Atid party, which holds 24 seats in the Knesset, has previously offered to bail out Netanyahu if he reaches a hostage deal and a coalition and other coalition members quit. So Lapid told the Times of Israel, there is a hostage deal on the table. If it is not true that Netanyahu has to choose between the hostage deal and his continued tenure as prime minister, I promise him a safety net. I will keep that promise. This is not an easy statement and is not an easy decision. Netanyahu is bad, failed prime minister, and is to blame for the October 7th disaster. But the most important thing is to bring the kidnapped people back home. And so, this is interesting. I've argued for some time that when people say Netanyahu is constrained by Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, these far-right ministers, that this is really a cop-out. That Netanyahu really does believe in these policies that Israel is enacting and enforcing right now, and these far-right ministers really provide him cover for the policies he would like to pursue. And I think if we now see Netanyahu not agree to a ceasefire deal, then that kind of vindicates my position there. All right, next up here, Latin parachute of Jerusalem condemns Israeli bombing of Catholic school in Gaza. No surprise here, the Catholic Authority in the Middle East has strongly condemned the Israeli bombing of a Catholic school in Gaza City, which killed at least 4 Palestinians. The Latin parachute of Jerusalem is monitoring the grave concern. The news of raids apparently launched by the Israeli military against the Holy Family School in Gaza this morning. Footage and media reports from the place include scenes of civilian casualties and the destruction of the compound, a statement said. The statement says that the school, which is the property of the Latin parachute, has been a place of the refuge of hundreds of civilians, and that no religious personnel currently reside there. The church condemns the strongest terms the targeting of civilians or any belligerent actions that fall short of ensuring that civilians remain outside of the combat scene. We continue to pray for the Lord's mercy and hope that parties will reach an agreement that will put an immediate end to the horrifying bloodbath and humanitarian catastrophe in the region. All right, before I wrap up here, two stories. I'm just going to kind of quickly summarize them. U.S. official says there are no plans to withdraw from Syria. This isn't like a major groundbreaking statement. The State Department was just asked by Rudal, which is a Kurdish outlet, if there are any plans to withdraw, to which the U.S. said no. This is unsurprising as the U.S. bats the Kurdish-led SDF in Syria. Now, this would be a really easy win for the U.S. At this point, the U.S. maintaining its presence in Syria is allowing the remnants of ISIS to fester. It's preventing Assad from gaining control of all of Syria, maybe cutting a deal with Turkey that would see the Syrian army return to the Turkish-Syrian border. In exchange, Turkey would withdraw and leave the occupation of Syrian Kurdish lands, so this would be good for the Kurds as well, and would also dislodge the Americans from the Middle East. It's important to remember that not only are the Kurds running a massive prison camp in Gaza, or not in Gaza, in Syria, that is torturing just many innocent people, the family members of ISIS, their children who may have been 2, 3, 5 years old at the time, are now teenagers nearing adulthood, and there's a lot of questions what's going to happen with them. Well, because of these Kurdish camps, these prison camps, they've been raised in prison camps with only the wives of the ISIS fighters to provide them any education or mentoring in their life. So extremely concerning what's going to happen there. Additionally, the SDF has been accused credibly of recruiting and conscripting children, including young girls, into their ranks. And then the second article is there is a real effort to end the war in Ukraine, although it likely will be undermined by the U.S. The Turkish president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, plans to invite not only Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, but Assad's main and most important backer, Vladimir Putin, to Turkey for talks. Now, this is huge. Turkey is a NATO member. Putin is wanted for war crimes by the West, so I'm sure that Putin won't actually make his way to Turkey just based on U.S. threats, but we'll see. And I do think this may suggest to some extent a fracturing of NATO, not just in the Middle East, but when it comes to European issues as well. All right, everybody, that's where I'm going to wrap up the show today. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Remember, if you can, head on over to the Libertarian Institute, make a donation, help our fundraiser, allow us to continue to fight against the war state and the DC establishment. And also, you can just go to the Institute and share all my content. It's all there. My news stories, the show, conflicts of interest, and follow me on Twitter at @KyleAnzalone_. Thanks, everyone.